In the summer of 1867, a remote agricultural settlement near Sedalia, Missouri, became the setting for the most unsettling medical documentation ever compiled in the American Midwest. The subject was 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell. Dr. Samuel Harding, the region's sole physician, meticulously filled 3 leather-bound journals with his observations of a child whose actions seemed to defy every known tenet of 19th-century medicine and human nature. To casual onlookers, the boy appeared normal, even charming. Yet, concealed beneath his innocent veneer was a reality that the medical science of the time was utterly incapable of explaining. Over a period of 6 months, 3 people died in separate accidents around Timothy Caldwell, alongside dozens of farm animals discovered dead under equally mysterious circumstances. 11 individuals who had, in some way, all crossed the path of a child whose pale blue eyes never seemed to reflect his smile. Local authorities sealed the official records and kept them hidden for more than a century. However, the truth concerning Timothy Caldwell unveils a depth of darkness that challenges all prior understanding of the potential for evil in childhood. A community scarred by loss. Before delving deeper into the history of Timothy Caldwell and the fear that gripped Sedalia County, if this narrative captures your interest, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. This ensures you never miss our intensive examinations of America's darkest historical enigmas. We also encourage you to share your location in the comments. We cherish hearing from our global community of mystery aficionados. The incidents that would ultimately make Timothy Caldwell infamous began not with an act of violence, but with a pervasive sense of loss. In 1867, Missouri was a state still reeling from the devastating impact of the Civil War. Communities like Sedalia had sacrificed their young men on distant battlefields, leaving behind orphans, widows, and towns struggling to recover and rebuild. The Caldwell farm, situated in a valley 15 miles south of Sedalia, had once been a symbol of prosperity. James and Martha Caldwell had established their homestead with ambitious plans for raising cattle and corn. Yet, these dreams were extinguished when James perished at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha valiantly attempted to manage the farm on her own, but consumption ultimately claimed her in the severe winter of 1865. Their son, Thomas, barely 21 years old, inherited a substantial debt and land he was ill-equipped to farm. When news reached Thomas that his brother William had died in Andersonville prison, leaving a widow and an 8-year-old son, he perceived both a new burden and a potential opportunity. Thomas needed assistance with the unending labor of farming, and the boy, Timothy, required a home. Arrival and initial observations. Thomas Caldwell was a hardened man, further toughened by the combined weight of war and personal tragedy. His wife, Sarah, had become sharp-tongued and resentful during their childless years. Neither was particularly suited to raising a child, especially the one who arrived at their doorstep in the spring of 1866. Timothy carried only a small cloth bag and possessed eyes that seemed far too mature for his young face. Timothy Caldwell was undersized for his age, with fair skin prone to sunburn in the Missouri heat, and blonde hair his Aunt Sarah kept closely cropped to prevent lice. He spoke sparingly about his life before the farm, only offering brief, fragmented details when pressed. His father was a soldier, his mother died coughing blood, and he had briefly lived with neighbors after her passing. Timothy's most striking quality to adults was his exceptional politeness. He consistently said, "Yes, sir," and "yes, and never once complained about work or punishment. In every observable way, he represented the ideal of a well-behaved child. Dr. Samuel Harding's first encounter with Timothy took place in June 1866, when the boy accompanied his uncle to town for necessary supplies. Harding, a graduate of the Missouri Medical College and among the few formally trained physicians west of St. Louis, had developed a sharp ability to read people during his years treating soldiers from both the Union and Confederate armies. Something about the Caldwell boy distinctly unsettled him, although he could not pinpoint the reason. The child was entirely respectful, Harding later documented in his journal. He maintained appropriate eye contact, answered all questions directly, and displayed none of the nervousness or bashfulness typical of rural children encountering strangers. Yet I found myself profoundly ill at ease in his presence. His gaze carried an intensity that suggested he was studying me with the same clinical scrutiny I usually reserve for my patients. The neighbor's unease. The Sedalia area's farming community was small enough that everyone was aware of everyone else's affairs. The Caldwell farm was remote, but not so isolated that neighbors failed to notice details. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose property bordered the Caldwell land, frequently observed Timothy tending to livestock or working in the fields. She commented to her husband that the boy worked with a singular focus for his age, never appearing to tire, and never pausing to play or rest, as children naturally should. It was like observing a little machine, she told her husband Samuel over dinner one evening. He'd work steadily from sunrise until sunset, never slowing down, never complaining. It's not natural for a boy to have no capacity for play at all. The Patterson farm raised chickens, and Eleanor noticed that her birds became agitated whenever Timothy came close to their shared property line. They would cluster together, squawking and ruffling their feathers, refusing to approach the dividing fence. While her husband dismissed this behavior as mere coincidence, Eleanor could not shake the feeling that the animals perceived something about the boy that human observers were missing. A trio of tragedies. The first death, Mary Fletcher. The first fatality occurred on a sweltering August afternoon in 1866. Little Mary Fletcher, aged 5, was the daughter of the town blacksmith, known locally for her cheerful laugh and tendency to wander. She had been playing near Willow Creek, a shallow stream running between several properties, including the Caldwell farm. Timothy found her body. He arrived at the Fletcher home just as the family was preparing for supper, his clothes damp and his face pale with what seemed to be genuine distress. "Mrs. Fletcher," he stated, his voice steady despite his obvious agitation. "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." The search party that rushed to the creek discovered Mary Fletcher face down in water that was barely 18 inches deep. Dr. Harding, immediately summoned, concluded the child had drowned, a tragic but common accident in rural areas where children play near water without supervision. What troubled Harding was not the drowning itself, but Timothy's detailed report of discovering the body. The boy gave an unusually precise description of the exact location where Mary was found, the position of her body, and the state of her clothing. When questioned about the circumstances that brought him to that specific spot at that particular time, Timothy explained he had been searching for a lost calf. The boy's recollection was remarkably accurate, Harding documented in his journal. He could describe the deceased child's limb's exact placement, how her dress was caught on a submerged branch, even the hue of the water around her face. Such attention to detail seemed anomalous for a child who claimed to be upset and frightened by the discovery. Thomas Caldwell confirmed he had sent Timothy to search the creek area, as one of their calves was indeed missing that morning. The calf was later found 2 days later, healthy and grazing in a meadow almost a mile away from the site of Mary Fletcher's drowning. The devastated Fletcher family accepted Timothy's condolences with gratitude. After all, he had been the one to promptly alert them and find their daughter. At the funeral, Timothy sat quietly with his aunt and uncle, his head bowed respectfully throughout the service. When the family expressed thanks for his swift action, he accepted their gratitude with appropriate solemnity. "I wish I could have found her sooner," he told Mary's father, his voice conveying exactly the right note of sorrow and regret. However, Eleanor Patterson, watching from the opposite side of the church, observed something that troubled her for days afterward. When Mary Fletcher's mother collapsed in grief, when the sight of the tiny coffin moved grown men to tears, Timothy Caldwell's expression remained unchanged. His head was appropriately bowed, but when he believed no one was watching, his pale blue eyes stayed dry and watchful, meticulously observing every detail of the emotional scene. The second death, Henrik Len. The second fatality occurred 3 weeks later. Old Henrik Len, a Norwegian immigrant who had worked as a logger until arthritis forced his retirement, was discovered at the base of a rocky formation known locally as Devil's Bluff. The bluff overlooked the very creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned, and Henrik was known for regularly climbing there to check on the wild beehives he managed. Once again, Timothy Caldwell was involved in the discovery. He had been walking home from town when he noticed something unusual at the bluff's base. "I saw Mr. Len's hat caught on a thorn bush," Timothy told the growing crowd. "I called out, but received no reply, so I climbed down to look. Henrik Larsson was dead, his neck broken from what appeared to be a fall from the top of the 40-foot bluff. Dr. Harding's examination determined the old man had likely died instantly upon impact. The only unusual detail at the scene was the presence of a greater number of dead bees scattered around the body than would typically be found away from a hive. Mr. Larson knew those bluffs better than anyone in the county, Samuel Patterson informed Dr. Harding after the examination. He'd been climbing up there for 3 years. Never so much as a stumble. It doesn't make sense that he'd fall now. When questioned, Timothy suggested that the old man might have been stung by bees and lost his footing. He was always talking about how aggressive they become when you disturb them, the boy offered. Maybe they swarmed him and he got confused. Dr. Harding found Timothy's explanation plausible, but an element of the scene still bothered him. The dead bees were concentrated in a small area directly surrounding Henrik's body. If the old man had disturbed a hive at the summit of the bluff, there should have been more evidence of bee activity along his likely path of flight and subsequent fall. Instead, it seemed as though the bees had been somehow concentrated around the impact site. When Harding ascended the bluff to inspect the hives, he found them intact and showing no recent signs of disturbance. The worker bees were active but calm, attending to their normal routine of gathering nectar from the late summer wildflowers. The third death, Jacob Mills. The third death irrevocably shattered any idea of mere coincidence. In September 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. His body was found 4 days later in an abandoned well nearly half a mile from where he was last seen. Timothy Caldwell had volunteered to join the search party. For 3 days, Timothy searched alongside the adult volunteers, exhibiting a remarkable endurance for a child his age. He seemed to possess an intimate knowledge of the woods, guiding searchers through areas that even longtime residents found difficult to navigate. When asked how he had learned the terrain so thoroughly, Timothy explained that he frequently explored the woods in his free time, searching for useful plants and herbs his aunt could use for cooking and medicine. On the 4th day, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin just after dawn. "I think I found something," he told Jacob's father, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "There's an old well about a half-mile north of here. I heard what sounded like crying." The well was partially hidden by fallen logs and overgrown brush. Jacob Mills was at the bottom, alive but barely conscious, suffering from exposure and dehydration. Dr. Harding was summoned instantly, but the boy died within hours of being pulled from the well, his small body unable to recover from the ordeal. The child had been at the bottom of that well for nearly 4 days, Harding recorded in his journal. The fact that Timothy Caldwell was able to locate him in such an obscure location raises disturbing questions. How extensive is the boy's knowledge of the local terrain? What other hidden dangers might he be aware of? Even more troubling was Timothy's conduct during Jacob's final hours. While the Mills family held a vigil around their dying son, Timothy sat quietly in the corner of the cabin, seemingly praying. However, Dr. Harding, positioned to observe the boy without being seen, witnessed something profoundly disturbing. Timothy was not praying. His lips were moving, but his eyes were fixed on Jacob Mills with an intensity that appeared almost scientific. He seemed to be cataloguing every detail of the dying child's condition, the labored breathing, the pale skin, the way consciousness flickered. When Jacob finally passed away, Timothy's face displayed no shock or grief. Instead, there was an expression Harding could only describe as satisfaction. Harding's investigation deepens. Following the funeral, Dr. Harding invented a pretext to visit the abandoned well where Jacob had been found. The site troubled him for reasons he couldn't quite name. The well was indeed exceptionally well hidden, concealed by natural debris that would have required considerable effort to move. Yet, Timothy had claimed to hear crying from this precise spot, a highly improbable claim given the well's depth and the dense brush covering it. As Harding examined the scene more carefully, he discovered something the initial rescue party, in their haste, had overlooked. The debris around the well's rim had been arranged with unusual precision. Logs and branches that should have fallen randomly showed evidence of deliberate placement, creating a natural-looking camouflage that would have been nearly impossible to notice unless one knew exactly where to look. The implications were too unsettling to voice aloud, but Harding could not dispel the suspicion that Jacob Mills had not simply fallen into the well. Someone had placed him there, and someone had meticulously concealed the location until the boy was too weak to survive rescue. That evening, Harding began maintaining detailed notes specifically about Timothy Caldwell. If his suspicions proved correct, the boy represented a genuine danger to the entire community. However, suspicions were not evidence, and evidence was precisely what Harding lacked. The core problem was that Timothy Caldwell was, by all outward measures, a model child. He regularly attended church with his aunt and uncle, reciting prayers with proper reverence and sitting quietly through services. He worked diligently on the farm, capably completing tasks that would challenge many adult laborers. He spoke respectfully to his elders and showed appropriate deference to figures of authority. Crucially, Timothy had plausible explanations for his presence at each tragedy. He was looking for a lost calf when he found Mary Fletcher. He was walking home from town when he spotted Henrik Lenn's hat. He volunteered to help search for Jacob Mills, as any concerned community member would. But Harding's medical training had taught him to look past superficial appearances. Treating wounded soldiers had trained him to recognize the markers of men who killed not out of patriotic duty or desperate necessity, but from a more fundamental and darker place. A coldness existed in such men, a detachment from normal human emotion that surfaced in subtle ways, a lack of appropriate reaction to horror, an intense interest in suffering, an ability to discuss violence with clinical impartiality. Timothy Caldwell exhibited all of these characteristics, compressed into the slight body and face of an 8-year-old child. A disturbing pattern of misfortune. Dr. Harding's investigation truly began in earnest in October 1866. Using his status as the community's physician, he made frequent visits to homes and farms throughout the area, ostensibly checking on the health of families still recovering from the war's hardships. In reality, he was gathering intelligence on Timothy Caldwell. What he uncovered painted a disturbing portrait of a child who appeared to be at the epicenter of an ever-expanding circle of misfortune. Livestock on neighboring farms had been dying at unusual rates, not from common disease, but from what seemed to be accidental injuries. Chickens were discovered with broken necks, seemingly killed by foxes that left no other evidence of predation. Pigs suffered mysterious wounds that became infected and resulted in death. Horses suddenly developed lameness that forced farmers to put them down. Mrs. Eleanina Patterson confided to Dr. Harding that she had lost 17 chickens in the past 2 months. "It's the strangest thing," she said. "They're dying 1 or 2 at a time, always found in the morning with their necks cleanly broken. My husband blames foxes, but I've never seen any fox sign near the coop. And the manner of killing, it's too neat." When Harding examined the most recent casualties, he found evidence supporting Eleanor's suspicions. The chickens had been killed with precise force applied to specific points on their necks, a technique requiring considerable anatomical knowledge. It was not the random violence typical of predator attacks, but something far more controlled and deliberate. Similar patterns emerged on other properties. James Wickham had lost 3 calves to what he termed freak accidents, animals that had somehow managed to strangle themselves on ropes or wedge their heads in fence rails in ways that defied logical explanation. Robert Dunham's prize bull had broken its leg after falling into a ditch, despite being known as one of the most sure-footed animals in the county. In every case, the affected farms were within walking distance of the Caldwell property. Furthermore, in several instances, neighbors reported having seen Timothy in the vicinity around the time of the incident. "I saw him walking along our fence line the morning before we found the calf," James Wickham told Dr. Harding. "Thought it was unusual, him being so far from home, but the boy was always polite when he saw me, waved and offered a greeting like he was properly taught." A clinical interest in death. Dr. Harding also began to pay closer attention to Timothy's behavior during his routine medical calls to the Caldwell farm. The boy was consistently present during these visits, standing quietly while Dr. Harding examined his aunt and uncle for the various ailments common to farm life. However, Harding noted that Timothy observed these examinations with unusual intensity, asking questions about medical procedures and anatomy that seemed advanced for a child his age. "How do you know if someone's really dead?" Timothy asked during one visit, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "Sometimes people just look like they're sleeping." When pressed to explain his curiosity, Timothy claimed he was concerned about being able to help in an emergency should someone get hurt while he was alone on the farm. "Uncle Thomas says I need to know how to handle emergencies since we're so far from town," he explained. The explanation was reasonable, but the core question deeply disturbed Dr. Harding. There was a clinical quality to Timothy's interest in injury and death that transcended normal childhood curiosity. The boy inquired about the mechanics of dying, how long it took, what signs to look for, whether people could survive various traumas, with the same cold detachment a medical student might exhibit when studying cadavers. During these conversations, Harding began testing Timothy's knowledge by offering deliberately false information, claiming that certain injuries were fatal when they were not, or that specific symptoms indicated particular conditions. Timothy never challenged these false statements directly. Yet, Harding noticed that the boy absorbed every piece of information with remarkable retention. Even more unsettling was Timothy's reaction to Dr. Harding's stories about treating wounded soldiers during the war. While most children would show appropriate sadness or shock when hearing about battlefield injuries, Timothy listened with rapt attention, asking detailed questions about wound patterns, blood loss, and survival rates. "Did they scream much when you cut off their arms?" Timothy inquired during one such conversation, his pale blue eyes fixed intently on Dr. Harding's face. "Or were they too hurt to make noise?" The question, delivered in Timothy's characteristically polite voice, sent a chill through Dr. Harding that he would never forget. The evidence in the cave. By November 1866, Dr. Harding had nearly filled 2 complete journals with his observations of Timothy Caldwell. The composite picture that emerged was that of a child possessing an adult's comprehension of death and violence, combined with a total absence of normal human empathy. But documentation was not the same as evidence. Evidence was what Harding needed if he hoped to protect the community from what he increasingly believed was a dangerous predator. The chance to gather that evidence arrived when Thomas Caldwell injured his back during the fall harvest. The injury necessitated bed rest and daily medical visits, granting Dr. Harding unprecedented access to the Caldwell home. During these visits, he started engaging Timothy in extended conversations, cautiously probing to ascertain the scope of the boy's knowledge and the nature of his thoughts. What he uncovered exceeded his darkest fears. Timothy Caldwell had been conducting experiments on living creatures for months, possibly years. Using a combination of direct observation and careful questioning, Dr. Harding determined that the boy had been systematically torturing and capturing small animals, studying their responses to various forms of distress and injury. Timothy had mentioned a cave during one of their conversations, describing it as a secluded place where he went to be alone and to think. When Dr. Harding investigated the site, he found a meticulously organized collection of animal bones, crude surgical tools fabricated from farm implements, and a series of detailed drawings documenting various experiments in mutilation and torture. The drawings were the most profoundly disturbing discovery. Rendered with surprisingly artistic skill for a child, they depicted rabbits, squirrels, birds, and larger animals in various stages of injury and dissection. Each drawing was accompanied by notes written in Timothy's careful hand, describing the animal's reactions, the time it took to die, and observations regarding which methods caused the most suffering. Subject remained conscious for approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes, read one notation next to a detailed drawing of a rabbit. Vocalizations decreased gradually. Movement ceased after application of pressure to throat. Dr. Harding realized that Timothy had been using the community's animals as subjects for increasingly sophisticated experiments in cruelty. The accidental deaths on neighboring farms were actually the result of Timothy's desire to test his methods on larger subjects. But the most chilling discovery was a newer collection of drawings that showed human figures in place of animals. These sketches depicted adults and children in various poses of injury and distress. Each was annotated with speculative notes about human anatomy and potential methods of causing harm. One drawing unequivocally showed Mary Fletcher, the first child to die. Another depicted Henrik Len. A third showed Jacob Mills at the bottom of a well, complete with detailed annotations about the effects of exposure and dehydration on the human body. Timothy Caldwell had not merely been present when these people died. He had meticulously planned their deaths, executed those plans with methodical precision, and documented the results for future study. As Dr. Harding would soon learn, the horror in Sedalia County was far from concluded. If this narrative is sending chills down your spine, please share this video with a friend who appreciates dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our channel, and don't forget to subscribe to ensure you never miss stories like this. Let's find out together what happens next. The confrontation. Dr. Harding faced an impossible dilemma. The evidence in the cave definitively proved that Timothy Caldwell was responsible for multiple deaths, but that evidence had been acquired through what amounted to an illegal search. Furthermore, the concept that an 8-year-old child could be a calculated murderer was so far removed from the accepted understanding of human nature that no court would accept such a claim. The medical science of 1867 possessed no framework for understanding psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. The dominant belief was that children were inherently innocent, capable of corruption only through traumatic experiences or negative influences. The notion that a child could be born without the capacity for moral reasoning or empathy was literally inconceivable to most people. Dr. Harding understood that if he presented his findings to the local authorities, he would most likely be dismissed as a man whose mind had been damaged by too many years of treating war casualties. The evidence would be rationalized away, Timothy would be defended as a traumatized orphan acting out his grief, and the killings would undoubtedly continue. Instead, Dr. Harding made the decision to confront Timothy directly. During his next visit to the Caldwell farm, he asked the boy to accompany him to check on the livestock in the far pasture. Once they were alone, Dr. Harding revealed his discovery in the cave. Timothy's reaction was entirely unexpected. The boy exhibited no surprise, no fear at being caught, and no denial. Instead, he listened calmly as Dr. Harding described the notes and drawings, occasionally nodding as if confirming the accuracy of the doctor's observations. "You're not going to tell anyone," Timothy stated when Dr. Harding finished speaking. It was not a plea or a question, but a statement of absolute, confident fact. "Why wouldn't I?" Dr. Harding asked, genuinely curious about the boy's rationale. Timothy smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion Dr. Harding had ever witnessed on his face. "Because no one would believe you," he said. "And because you're curious about what I'll do next." The boy was correct on both points. Dr. Harding knew his claims would likely sound like the ravings of a man losing his sanity. However, Timothy had also pinpointed something the doctor was reluctant to admit, even to himself, a scientific fascination with observing the development of perhaps the most dangerous human being he had ever encountered. "How long have you been doing this?" Dr. Harding asked. "Since I was 5, Timothy replied matter-of-factly. "Perhaps earlier. I started with insects, then mice, then larger things. It's fascinating to see how different animals react to the same treatments. And the people who died." Timothy shrugged. "They were experiments, too. I wanted to see if people would react the same way as animals. They mostly do, but they are better at understanding what is happening to them. That makes it more interesting." Dr. Harding felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "What are you planning to do next?" Timothy considered the question seriously before responding. "I need to find out what happens when you injure someone who trusts you completely, someone who wouldn't suspect anything until it was far too late." The implication was horrifyingly clear. Timothy was planning to kill his aunt and uncle. Dr. Harding knew he likely had only days, perhaps mere hours, before Timothy acted on his intentions. The boy had revealed his plans with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, and past events indicated that Timothy did not hesitate once he had decided on a course of action. The plan to act. That evening, Dr. Harding visited Sheriff William Crawford in Sedalia. Crawford was a pragmatic man who had served honorably in the Union Army, with little patience for speculation or theories. However, he also trusted Dr. Harding's judgment and was prepared to listen to evidence, regardless of how unusual the circumstances were. Dr. Harding presented his case methodically, focusing on verifiable facts rather than psychological theories. He showed Crawford the notes and drawings from the cave, documented the pattern of accidents and deaths surrounding Timothy, and highlighted the boy's abnormal knowledge of violence and anatomy. Most critically, Dr. Harding revealed Timothy's stated intention to kill his aunt and uncle. This was information that could not be dismissed. irrespective of its source. Even if only half of what you're telling me is true, Sheriff Crawford said after reviewing the evidence, examining each disturbing drawing with mounting alarm, we cannot arrest a child based on suspicions and drawings. But we can watch him, and we can be prepared to act if he attempts anything. Crawford studied the anatomical precision of Timothy's sketches, noting details that even his experience as a Civil War veteran had not prepared him for. The two men spent hours meticulously developing their strategy, bringing in Crawford's most trusted deputies, men who had served under him during the war and could be relied upon to remain steady under pressure. Dr. Harding and Sheriff Crawford devised a comprehensive plan. Dr. Harding would arrive at the Caldwell farm at his customary time, bringing laudanum ostensibly for Thomas's pain management, but actually to sedate both Thomas and Sarah enough to prevent Timothy from easily harming them. Sheriff Crawford and his deputies would then position themselves strategically around the farm property, close enough to respond immediately but far enough away to avoid detection. The final visit. The plan was implemented the following morning. As Dr. Harding's buggy approached the farmhouse, he immediately noticed an anomaly. The usual morning sounds of farm activity, pigs grunting in their pen, chickens pecking in the yard, were absent. The property was cloaked in an unsettling quiet that made his skin crawl. Timothy appeared in the doorway before Dr. Harding had even climbed down from his buggy. The boy stood perfectly still, his pale blue eyes tracking the doctor's movements with a predatory focus. He was dressed in his typical work clothes, but Dr. Harding observed that Timothy's sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, and his hands appeared to have been recently scrubbed, the kind of thorough cleaning that suggested preparation for messy work. "Good morning, Dr. Harding," Timothy said, his voice maintaining its characteristic politeness. But something deeper had changed. There was an excitement, an anticipation the boy was struggling to contain. "I've been waiting for you." The word sent a deep chill through Dr. Harding. Timothy's use of waiting implied he had been expecting this visit, perhaps even counting on it as a component of whatever plan he had set in motion. Inside the house, Dr. Harding found Thomas and Sarah Caldwell in their bedroom, both seemingly sleeping peacefully. However, as he approached Thomas's bed to check his condition, he noticed the man's breathing was unusually shallow, and his skin had acquired a grayish pallor that suggested more than natural sleep. "What did you administer to them?" Dr. Harding asked quietly, not turning to look at Timothy, but knowing the boy was observing his every move. "Just some herbs I gathered in the woods," Timothy replied, his tone innocent, but his choice of words deliberate. "There are so many fascinating plants growing wild around here. Some of them possess very useful properties." Dr. Harding checked Thomas's pulse and found it weak but steady. Sarah exhibited similar symptoms. She was deeply unconscious but still alive. Whatever substance Timothy had used, he had been careful with the dosage. The boy wanted his victims helpless but alive, at least for the moment. "They're not going to wake up for several hours," Timothy continued.